I'm going to tell you about the hybrids. This is a long channel, so I'm probably going to end up breaking it up in a couple parts, but essentially I'm going to tell you about the Garden of Eden and all of the lovely experimentation that happened there. I'm going to tell you about how the Starseed program came about, and third, I'm going to discuss how this affects us right now. So let's get into it. If you followed me for some time, whether it's here or on my Substack or Medium, then you know I talk a lot about the Anuhazi, the original peoples of Terra within the realm of Tiamat. So our Earth is a quarantine zone or quarantine project within a larger landmass. I mean, I guess it's broken off kind of now, but a larger landmass that is known as Terra. And Terra is a part of the realm of Tiamat, which was divided into 13 zones. The one that we sit in, Project Earth, is the center zone of these quarantined zones, if you will, of Tiamat. The Garden of Eden is the genetic laboratory that was established by the Nuberians, but controlled by who we know as the Anunnaki. I'm going to stop right here because it's really important that you understand that the Anunnaki are not a race of beings. The Anunnaki is a faction. It is a faction of power within the Galactic Federation, but very specific to the zone of Tiamat. The Anunnaki had several experimentation stations. Terra's was called the Garden of Eden. So the primary purpose of the Garden of Eden was to map out the human genome, modify it so that aspects that were unique to the Anuhazi could be manipulated, modified, and used for the Galactic Empire as a whole. So while it's true that the Nuberians had gained access to Terra to get resources such as gold and other minerals to support their atmosphere, which is a whole other thing, the fact that there was a genetic manipulation of Tiamat and Terra is related to what was discovered in this zone. So when the Nuberians came to Terra to begin their extraction, they interacted with the Anuhazi and observed their ridiculous skills in terms of literally interacting with the grid. So things that we now associate with sometimes magic, but even more basic things like energy work, quantum work, dream work, talking with the ancestors, activated pineal glands, third eyes, all the things that we label psychic, extrasensory, spiritual gifts now. This is related to neuromelanin. So the primary purpose of the Garden of Eden was to figure out how they could extract and isolate neuromelanin from the Anuhazi. Basically, how could they modify the human genome or extract the neuromelanin for their purposes? Either it could be used in lots of things, extending their life, increasing their power, extending their own ability to manipulate and work with the environment. There's lots of different objectives that were happening. When beings were invited to the Garden of Eden, it was basically under the guise of trying to figure out how they could work with, extract, or isolate neuromelanin. This also spun out into other primary objectives, such as can we modify the way in which neuromelanin is being produced in the body or being used by the individual, either turn up or turn down other aspects of their genome. Essentially, they wanted to create certain types of beings who were going to be more docile, more in line with colonization, I don't know, conquest, whatever the purposes of the Galactic Federation at that time. How can we create a local species that is going to be more amicable to us and our purposes, but we can still utilize their connection to the grid, their production of neuromelanin for our purposes. At this point, humans, as far as I know in this download, are the only species that produces neuromelanin. So that is one of the reasons why they have to keep us around, is because if they kill us all off, then they also kill off their supply of neuromelanin. They have not figured out how to produce it synthetically without an actual live human, but very specifically, the humans have to carry enough of Anuhazi original bloodlines. They wanted to figure out a way how to extract neuromelanin for their own purposes, which varied. The Anunnaki are formed of varying galactic races, systems, projects. Just to summarize before we go on to the next part, the Garden of Eden was a genetic laboratory here in Terra, in the quarantine zone within the realm of Tiamat. The purpose of the genetic laboratory, the purpose of the Garden of Eden, was to figure out ways how to isolate the chemical neuromelanin that is produced exclusively by humans. The reason being is that this particular chemical that is produced by humans allows access to what we call consciousness. It allows manipulation of energy, time, work with natural environment, modification of the world, all through the pineal gland. When the Anuhazi were in the Garden of Eden, that's where the breeding program and the genetic modification started. So there were different generations that were born in the Garden of Eden. And through these generations, different things happened because the Anunnaki were working on modifying the DNA in order to try to isolate neuromelanin, create beings for different purposes. So some beings they were trying to create for a workforce that was going to just blindly obey the orders, do what they needed to do, while still finding ways to extract neuromelanin from them the best that they could. And then some beings were used for other purposes. You know, they're bred to be like the leaders, who were better, still meant to follow orders, but at a higher cognitive level. Again, there's lots of different agendas and lots of different hypotheses happening within the Garden of Eden. Remember, it's an experimentation genetics lab. So what happens is after every batch or generation, there comes a time when that generation or that batch was judged. Is this a batch that we can use? Are we going to keep them? Are we going to use them to seed the next cycle, the next batch of experiment? Or are we going to say, okay, thank you, goodbye now? The ones that they said thank you, goodbye to, the ones that they kicked out, were put back out into Terra as a whole, or in other realms of Tiamat. It's important to know that these generations, before they were judged or before they were kicked out or whatever, these generations were humans that had all kinds of different combinations of DNA. So they were splicing DNA other galactic races. So that's one of the reasons we have galactic DNA. So some, they might say we had a project over in Pleiades, and none of these names necessarily mean what we think they mean, but I'm going to use it because that's our current vocabulary. But we had a project in the Pleiades, so I'm going to splice in the genetic material from Pleiadians with the human. We're going to see what happens when we do this, and that's a generation. We're going to take some Syrian DNA and we're going to do that. That's a DNA. That's a generation. They took animal DNA and spliced it together. So there's all these different combinations that they're running to see to test their hypotheses. That's when you start having all these different lines that are mixing. And depending on how well they're meeting the parameters of whatever the project objective is at that time, they either stay in the garden to seed the next generation, or they are pushed back out to outside of the garden. Now, this isn't always the case. Some groups willingly leave. Some groups say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. Some groups say, this is not for me, and they take themselves and their children, their line, and they leave as well. One of the most famous examples of an Anuhazi person who decided that they were not going to accept the conditions of the Garden of Eden is Lilith. Again, was her name really Lilith? Is it an allegory? I don't really know. But we do know that that is one of the first groups who chose to say, I am not going to participate in this. So Lilith and her line left the garden. So what are the hybrids? Are the lines of people who carry Anuhazi DNA, as well as the remnants of the different experimentation that was done in the garden. So a hybrid might be an individual who has Anuhazi DNA, Pleiadian DNA, and dolphin DNA, or it can be a Syrian-based Anuhazi person. It's also important to understand all of the Anuhazi that were in the garden also had Lyran DNA, because those were the people that were targeted. So not all Anuhazi that ever existed on the planet in Terra were Lyran, but every being that was in the garden was Lyran. So for those people now who are kind of waking up, which I'll get into the next video, but you're like, I think I'm Lyran and Pleiadian and Arcturian, you're not crazy. You're not crazy for thinking that you have all these different lineages. Most likely your DNA, it's being activated back to all the genetic splicing that was done throughout the generations in your bloodline. And I want to say that we've been led to think like the Garden of Eden, it all happened really fast. Even the idea of people leaving and going out over the world, we think of it, I think, because our lifespans have been shortened so much, so we think of it like a year or 2 years, or even like a generation might be 50 years or something like that. But at this time, generations were like, so when I say that like a generation or generations were in the Garden of Eden, we're talking about thousands of years, tens of thousands of years of evolution, time of how the world was working both inside the garden and outside of the garden. Time also moves differently inside the garden and inside the quarantine zones, which is an important piece. So I think I've talked about the garden now, and we'll talk in the next one. All right, so to summarize this part again, hybrids were the people that lived within the Garden of Eden. They were the result of genetic modification from the original peoples of Terra, the Anuhazi, and various genetic splicing of galactic races and different animal consciousness or different animal DNA. It's also important to note that this genetic splicing went both ways. So it wasn't just humans getting spliced into, but animals were also getting spliced with human DNA. So a lot of the animal consciousness and animal collectives that we think, I can communicate with them, I can speak with them, they're intelligent beings, it is because these specific species were also part of the genetic modification program as well. Yes, the animals, plants, things like that do carry consciousness. This is what seeding really means. So right now we're going to get quantum here. So you're going to have to detach your brain from the idea of linear time to understand the Starseed program. The Starseed program is a past, future consciousness transfer program that allows a fragment of someone's consciousness to overwrite another consciousness. So if you've ever seen the Netflix show Travelers, I think that is a perfect example of what I'm talking about in terms of Starseed fragmented consciousness. There is a whole consciousness that is locally stored somewhere. We're going to get into that in another minute, but it's stored in a quantum computer, and then that is fragmented and inserted in the appropriate timelines for the appropriate reasons that are designed depending on your objectives. So like I said before, there is an overarching political structure that is deciding what is happening and why it's happening in this project Earth. Depending on where your consciousness is stored and what faction you are aligned with, you're going to have a whole bunch of different objectives. So Starseed consciousness has been put here within the hybrid bloodlines in order to manipulate timelines. So Project Earth is a unique type of quantum simulation. Starseeds are interjected into certain bloodlines, which I'll explain again in a minute, but certain bloodlines with varying objectives to manipulate the timeline. Depending on the faction, depending on the objective, depending on the agenda, this can come out in many, many different ways. Essentially, the you that's watching me now, the you is your higher self, whatever you want to call it, is locally stored in a quantum computer somewhere. A fragment comes into the quantum project of the Earth at some level of timeline or overlay. And then you are completing your missions in order to do certain things with that timeline. The choices of the Starseeds in this program are meant to interact with both other people as well as the actual timeline overlays of Project Earth to create specific choice points, create specific renderings of the world. So this is where the concept of New Earth comes in, because there is a very specific collective that is here to manipulate the flow of time, manipulate the overlays that are rendering on the project to create a new version of this project. There are also starseeds that are working with timelines to close out overlays, to close out certain timelines or renderings of the project because they've been determined to be non-viable, meaning that for the group, the faction, whoever they are aligned with, that group has determined that that particular rendering of the project is not compatible with their overarching mission, agenda, or their goals. So their Starseed collective is given directions to move time, change time, bend the timelines to close it out. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about about closing out timelines, check other my videos. I talk all about collapsing them. But here's the thing. Only specific lines or lineages of Anuhazi have enough neuromelanin or have the specific types of neuromelanin and DNA compatibility that the Starseed program needs in order to execute their objectives. Because all of this activation, all of the quantum activation that is done via the Starseed program is done via DNA. If we go back to the Garden of Eden, all of this was done with genetic and DNA manipulation. Even the Lyrans, all of this was done by introducing specific components into the human genome. So bloodlines have been tagged since the Garden of Eden, tagged and tracked. Your DNA contains specific genetic markers. Those genetic markers, depending on who is trying to utilize your bloodline or utilize your lineage, is activated off-world by that consciousness, and then that's when the transfer initiates and starts over. So many starseeds say, I experienced a walk-in, or I know, like, I was different before this big event, or I can't remember any of my childhood, or whatever it is. That is because there are different points in your life where your DNA has been activated by whomever. And there are people who have multiple collectives, multiple galactic lines that are trying to vie for control of your lineage. This is why you have to get crystal clear about who are the guides I'm talking to? Where is this intuition coming from? Why do I feel compelled to do the things that I'm being compelled to do? Because you can be activated by groups, by missions, by DNA that maybe is contradictory to a lot of your own personal beliefs or values, or you find ways to integrate those and come into wholeness with them. Another common thing experienced by starseeds is the concept of near-death experiences. You may have felt, or things that may have happened to you where you know for a fact that you should have died, or you could have died, or you had this out of body experience. Those are times when you were being overwritten. Maybe you've had experiences with quantum leaps, quantum shifting, where you know that the world was one way and now it's a completely different way. Sometimes you are experiencing different overlays, but a lot of other times, what's happened is another fragment of your central consciousness is overriding your current one. Like a new version of you is that's more aligned, or that's going to take the project in a different path, is being inserted and activated within your DNA. So I said I was going to say, what does this mean practically for all of us walking around? Like, why do we care? So when starseeds, you feel very close to a specific galactic lineage, that is because most likely that is where your consciousness is being housed, the local quantum computer where your consciousness, your higher self, if you want to say that, is being stored. So I know, because I've had visions and quantumly shifted and merged with my quantum consciousness being stored. Mine is being stored in the Pleiades. So that's where I know my consciousness is being stored. However, I think that anytime you're feeling very specifically pulled to working with beings from a specific galactic race, or knowing more information about a specific galactic race, then that's where your consciousness is coming from. And again, for the people who identify as Lyran, that adds another layer to it. But very specifically, most likely your Lyran is coming via the Anuhazi piece, not necessarily the galactic piece. So then what's the point of all of this? Why do we care? I mean, I don't know why you care, but very specifically, what has been shown to me is that the hybrids are responsible for a new integrated version of Earth, meaning that for the Anuhazi lines, for human lines to reclaim their power over the planet, but using and integrating the galactic consciousness. Because at this point, we can't erase completely the galactic influence of our world, but we can step into the role within the Galactic Federation. We can step in as an equal. We don't have to continue being test subjects. We don't have to continue taking on the role of the subjugated. That's what happens when we're asleep. Our role is to awaken, integrate both the galactic and the human aspects, and demand our voice be heard within this alliance. That's the only way that we can actually move forward as a human race. Otherwise, we're just subject to the resets once again.